Jeffrey, thank you so much for spending some time with me this morning. I appreciate it. It's nice to meet you.
Same here. You have a lot of toys in your background there.
Yeah, it started with I just want one, and then it just kind of evolved into this. So, yeah, thank you. Just years and years of collecting. We're here to talk about commitment to life. Um, and so actually, I'll just start off instead of me talking about it, to tell us a little bit about it.
Commitment to Life is a feature documentary, and it is about how the city of Los Angeles responded to the HIV/AIDS crisis in starting in the early '80s, and in particular how Hollywood played a role in helping to destigmatize HIV/AIDS when it was at the very beginning when there was so little understanding and so much discrimination and fear around this disease. So it tracks the story from the early '80s, as I mentioned, all the way through to today, and we see the progress that we've made. And LA played a very important role. In particular, Hollywood played a very important role, and that's not really been talked about as much as it should be. We've seen films about New York City and San Francisco, and every city has their own story, but LA has a really unique story.
Yeah, I'm actually from Berkeley, so I grew up learning a lot about kind of that movement and things that went on across the bridge. So it was kind of nice to see this West LA story. I think one of the things I really liked was the way you laid the foundation about even the struggles of just the gay community, where they kind of had to um build their own community and safe haven, and in a place where, like you see in the film early on, where they say you can walk down the street together, and it felt normal. And this is in a time where it was still very, very much a taboo subject, um and very shunned upon by many, because I mean, we just didn't have that understanding yet, I think, as people. um and then now you add AIDS on top of it. You add you add this on top of it, and you see how they have to really do it on their own.
That's right. No, that's absolutely right. I think people forget, especially younger people who grew up in a world where being gay, trans, lesbian, LGBTQIA, whatever letters you want to add to that, it's been sort of normalized. There are still issues, obviously, but pre-AIDS, the gay community was gaining in strength. This was a little bit over 10 years after Stonewall and the birth of the modern gay liberation movement, but it was still, especially in LA, very closeted. In the entertainment community, it was still a very closeted community.
Mhm.
People did not talk about their private lives. They did not, one of the interviewees in the film talks about this in private to me, that they said, well, we would just like make up girlfriends. We would make up girlfriends. We wouldn't talk about our private lives. We had our own sort of ways of getting together and recognizing each other, but we never really let the world see who we were. And AIDS really forced the issue, because suddenly we were sick and dying, and it was also a very there were physical manifestations of the disease too, so you couldn't hide it. So we had to really show the world who we were, and we showed the world the best of who we were, and we showed the world how we loved each other and cared for each other, and stepped up for each other. And also people forget the gay community, like men were very separate from women
Mhm.
at that time, and so the AIDS crisis really forced us to get to know who we were, even among ourselves too. So I don't think we certainly wouldn't be where we are today in the movement had HIV/AIDS not happened. I mean, marriage equality, some people think, is really a direct outgrowth of what happened with AIDS, where our relationships were not acknowledged or respected legally. And so when AIDS happened, and there was a couple, and one of them passed from AIDS, the family could come in and take everything, because the surviving partner had no rights, no legal rights, or they couldn't visit their partner in the hospital when they were sick. So these things really forced us to say to the world, like, this is who we are. Our relationships are just as important and valid
Mhm.
as everybody else's, and we need legal recognition of them.
What I really took away from your film was the positive tone throughout the film. And that surprised me a bit, because sometimes when you go into a film like this, you have the perception that, yes, there's going to be, that kind of that sunrise moment near the end of it, but I didn't expect to have that positive tone even through people's experiences through the beginning, where yes, they struggled, but I think looking back at the struggles, that it's seen as such a victory now, that it is a positive story, especially now that you can tell it to be a lot more inspiring than it is more of a doom and gloom story. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I'm glad you picked up on that. I really want people to understand that this is not going to be a movie that is going to be a really difficult watch. I mean, obviously there are going to be difficult moments in the film, especially the first sort of 10, 20 minutes of the film
Mhm.
where it seemed like there was no hope, and at the beginning, before even HIV was acknowledged as a virus, people didn't know how it could be transmitted. So if your friend got sick with HIV, we didn't even know it was HIV then. That's the name of the virus. We didn't know it was a virus. So people would say, "Oh, my friend's sick. Like, can I even go visit him? Can I touch him? Can I be in
Mhm.
the same room of him with him, or her? Excuse me." Um, so what the film tries to show is how we came together as a community, and after that initial wave of confusion and sadness and death that continued. I mean, people were dying all the way through the mid late 90s, until that started to slow down. But what we really wanted to show in the film is the best of us, and also with Hollywood, what do we do when there's an issue that needs solving? Like, let's put on a show. So we have
Yeah.
all these,
Mhm.
we have people like Bruce Valanche, who was from the very beginning like writing the scripts for all these fundraisers and getting stars together. And at the beginning it was like kind of B level stars like Mamie Van Doren, who nobody really probably knows today, but she was like a camp star. I guess the Pamela Anderson of the 70s and the 80s, and so they would do these small fundraisers. And then when Elizabeth Taylor got involved, like this is like A-list, A-level Hollywood, and everyone loves Elizabeth Taylor. So she was somebody who decided that she could try and use her celebrity and do something good with it. I mean, she'd always say, like, what's the point of being famous if I can't do something good with
Mhm.
this, And so in America, we do need celebrities to kind of shine a light on sometimes on our problems. And then with APLA, we really wanted to show how APLA started, AIDS Project Los Angeles. This was a bunch of friends who were not politicians or activists. I mean, they were just regular people living their lives. And this small group of people, their friends and loved ones started getting sick and dying. And they're like, well, what can we do about it? What can we do about it? So it started very small and started with like, well, let's start a phone bank. Let's start a phone bank where people could call this phone number and get information, obviously way pre-internet. So there
Mhm.
was so little information out there. They say that at the beginning, the phone bank that APLA started, they had a piece of paper, and everything that they knew about HIV/AIDS could fit on the front and back of that one piece of paper. So people would call in, and just like people who thought that maybe they were sick or they were paranoid, like, oh my God, I think I might have it, or a father or a mother of somebody who had just died, or somebody who's sick, just has no idea of what's going on and needs that help and support. So that moved on to the buddy program. And this was where people with AIDS would be sort of assigned a buddy that would just be there for them no matter what, and this was a very intimate relationship that these folks had with people who were sick and dying, and they saw them all the way through to the end. Even simple things like sitting and watching Golden Girls with them, or taking
Mhm.
them shopping or walking their dog or just sitting with them, and then also supporting them to the end. So that really just shows like the best of us. And I hope that this film really can show that we can come together, and we can lead with love. And that's what it's all about. It's called Commitment to Life. And that's all about just leading with love.
There's one point that was made in the film that I never thought of, and it really kind of struck me as interesting. One of your interviews said, when you're living with AIDS and you have the prospect to die, you kind of live freely. But now that I know that I have to think about the future, it gets a little bit more difficult. That was an interesting prospect. That's an interesting thought, I think. And I didn't think about how, some of those resources were not just to help people get over the understanding that they had it, but also now the idea is that no, you're actually gonna live on. So live, and you have more time.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, what was that like to kind of at that point in the film? I think it was pretty important.
Well, at the beginning, if you were diagnosed with HIV or AIDS, it was essentially a death sentence. I mean, at the beginning, there were no treatments available. The doctors could, what AIDS is it attacks your immune system. So HIV attacks your immune system. So your body, you might get a cold, and
Hmm.
if you had a healthy immune system, you'd get over it in a day or two. But if you had HIV or AIDS, your body had no resources to fight that cold. So all these strange things would be happening where the body would just have no ability to fight for itself. So people just withered away a lot of the time, and slowly over time there were treatments that came about, and then in the mid 1990s there were some medications that came along that actually did stop the progression of the disease, and it was like a miracle, right? So a lot of people who were survivors of this, and when you were diagnosed in the early days, they would give you maybe 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, like you really didn't feel like there was any hope. And then at some point there was hope. So people who were survivors of this, who had lived through the 80s into the mid 90s, suddenly they get these new medications. And it's not like it was a switch that they turned on and suddenly they're healthy. I mean, these
Hmm.
you had to take like a pile of pills every day,
Yeah,
and
you
like three
showed that.
times a day. People would have little timers with buzzers and it would go off and everyone would like be taking their pills. But they decided they realized that they were going to live. So one of the guys in our film, Reverend Steve Peters, who is still with us, and he's a 40+ year survivor of AIDS. He's one of those people that you mentioned, where suddenly, oh my gosh, I guess I'm going to live, but I have no money in the bank, and I've raked up my credit card bills. And so he actually, it's not in the film, but he ended up going to work for Playboy. He had
Oh
a whole
wow.
other life because he was friends with. This is off topic, but he was friends with Hugh Hefner's daughter, Christy Hefner. So she gave him a job at Playboy. So he was like interviewing the Playmates and writing
Oh, very cool.
blurbs at the Playmates. But Reverend Steve Peters, he's still with us. He was if you saw the recent film about Tammy Faye Baker, there's a scene in that film where she interviews a person with AIDS on her TV show, and that's Steve Peters. That's him.
Oh, interesting. That is actually super nice thing to know, even if it's a bit off topic, but still on topic. How long did it take for you to put this together? And where really did it begin for you to like, hey, you know what, this is kind of the story I want to tell.
Well, I've been making films about different figures in the LGBT community for years, and always like AIDS was always very prominent in my work. I made a film about Vito Russo, who was a very beloved gay activist and AIDS activist also, and he died of AIDS. So in a lot of my films, AIDS sort of reared its head in one way or another, and in my own life, this is something that it's been part of my life for decades in all of our lives. But this was a film that came to me. APLA, AIDS Project Los Angeles, is now known as APLA Health. They changed their name a few years back to APLA Health, and they were about to hit their, I guess, 35th anniversary a few years ago. Now they're at their 40th anniversary, and they started thinking like, well, what if we made a movie about APLA, and it was just going to be like a small, maybe a video for YouTube or a tribute dinner,
Hmm.
or fundraising video. But Ron Sylvester, our executive producer, he was on the board of APLA Health at the time, and he's like, well, maybe we should actually try to find a filmmaker to help us figure out what this thing is. And so they brought me on. It was about 3 years ago and change, and we just started having conversations, and the idea for the film started expanding. It was not just going to be about APLA, it was going to be about the city of LA, the city of
Hmm.
Los Angeles. So it was going to hit on different aspects: APLA, of course, Hollywood, the Black community, which is a whole other story, the Latino community, so all of these different parts of the city and all these different stratas of society, and everyone had to sort of figure out how to attack this, and everyone had a role to play. So that's how the film came together, and we've been working on it for, like I said, about 3 years. COVID came along, and I kind of thought, oh, this is going to go away, because a lot of things were going away, opportunities, but it didn't. And APLA Health, they were committed to making this movie, and we were filming all our interviews at the height of COVID. I think
Wow.
November-ish of 2020, we were filming our interviews, and we had to figure out a way to do it. We had COVID. That's when the COVID compliance rules started coming in for filmmaking, and we did everything that we could to keep people safe. And we had a COVID compliance officer, and everybody got tested and all that stuff. So it was interesting making a movie about a plague, during a new plague, and there were a lot of eerie similarities. And everyone we interviewed, that's really the first thing we would all talk about is, oh, doesn't this a little bit familiar? Well, we're living through a second plague right now.
I like that you mentioned you wanted to keep it centered and then it kept growing because I like that in the documentary, even realizing that despite everything that that organization was doing, um, there was actually other smaller minorities doing their own things. It says, I remember, I'm terrible with names. The um she said, while they were doing galas and dinners, we were doing barbecues.
Right.
And
That's Jewel. Yes,
yeah, and then while but I enjoyed the fact that as you progressed, you also learned that it was you're all connected and you needed each other. So she made
that's
the
right.
board, and then changes happened, and then things kept growing, and
Right.
despite backgrounds, you were able to work together. I thought that was really important.
That's a really important point in the film too. When AIDS first started, the face of AIDS was a white gay male, right? That's what the media really seemed to focus on. And even within the Black community and the Latino community, like they didn't think it was their problem, because the face of AIDS was white. But what we know is that HIV/AIDS hit these communities disproportionately, and this was a huge crisis. But there was a real deafening silence within a lot of those communities. They just didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to think about it, didn't want to think that this could be our problem too. So there were people like Jewel Tace Williams, who was the owner of the Catch One discotheque, and which was the a mecca for people of color in LA to go and have fun and to dance. But Jewel was a community activist, and so she made sure to get the message out. And she saw what APLA was doing with these big star-studded fundraisers that raised millions of dollars. They didn't have the ability to do that themselves. So like you said, they would do things like have a cookout, or they started their own kind of version of these big fundraisers with all the Black divas of the time, and called Divas Simply Singing. And she co-founded the Minority AIDS Project, was the first organization in LA to focus exclusively on people of color. Vienna Star Human Services was another organization that came about, that was started by a guy named Oscar de la O, and they focused on the Latino community, which had a very separate sort of set of problems. So, but at the end of the day, we all had a part to play, and sometimes we were able to work together.
What was your biggest takeaway, I think, in your journey these last 3 years, and interviewing these people and kind of then putting it all together? What did you take away from the story yourself?
Just gave me a lot of hope for the human species, for all of us. We it just seemed so impossible at the beginning. It felt like there was no hope, and slowly over time, we were able to show the world the best of us, and we were able to overcome this. It's still a major problem. HIV/AIDS is not over. It's not gone away. We need to talk about it more and more and more. Especially young people need to know. But it gave me hope, because we're still facing these seemingly unsolvable problems in our country and in our world, and it gave me hope that we can maybe make a difference in those problems and use the lessons we learned of HIV/AIDS and apply them to today.
That's a very good point. Very important topic. Very positive film, despite sometimes what you might think of the topic. Jeffrey, thank you so much. I guess we'll wrap it up where you will be at Santa Barbara Film Festival, correct?
Yeah, we're playing this Saturday is our world premiere at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival. We're playing Saturday night and February 11th, and Sunday morning, February 12th. And then we'll hopefully continue out on the festival circuit over the course of the year.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on your world premiere. I hope everyone enjoys this film as much as I did, and they get that sense of hope and a little bit of positivity like I did as well. So thank you so much for your time. I do this because I see it as a privilege to talk to people like you, and I look forward to sharing this with all of our viewers.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Emmanuel.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.